I'm getting married in 4 months, and this whole situation is tearing my family apart. I need outside perspectives because everyone involved is biased, and I honestly don't know if I'm being unreasonable or not. My parents, David and Linda, were married for 23 years. They seemed happy from my perspective. Sure, they had their disagreements like any couple, but nothing that seemed serious. My dad was always the type to bring my mom flowers randomly. They went on date nights regularly, and they supported each other through everything. My mom's best friend, Rachel, was practically family. She was at every birthday party, holiday gathering, and major life event. Her kids grew up with me and my brother like cousins. Rachel and her husband Mike would come over for barbecues every weekend during the summer. 8 months ago, my world completely fell apart. My mom found out that my dad had been having an affair with Rachel for over 2 years. Not just a one-time mistake, a full-blown relationship with hotels, weekend trips, secret phone calls, and plans to leave their spouses for each other. The way my mom found out was devastating. She went to surprise my dad at his office for their anniversary and saw him kissing Rachel in the parking lot. When she confronted them, they didn't even try to deny it. Rachel actually had the nerve to say they were in love and couldn't help themselves. My mom called her a backstabbing bitch right there in the parking lot, and Rachel just stood there looking guilty, but defiant. My mom was completely destroyed. She trusted these two people more than anyone else in the world, and they both betrayed her in the worst possible way. The first few weeks were absolute hell. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and would just sit on the couch staring at nothing for hours. I had to take time off work to stay with her, because I was genuinely worried she might hurt herself. Rachel's husband Mike was just as devastated when he found out. Apparently Rachel had been lying to him for 2 years, making up girls' nights and work trips that were actually hookups with my dad. The betrayal hit him hard, but Mike is one of those guys who internalizes everything. He filed for divorce immediately, but he's been fighting Rachel for custody of their 2 kids. The divorce has been dragging on for months because Rachel keeps changing lawyers and trying to delay the proceedings. Mike's been staying with his parents across town while the legal stuff gets sorted out, and his kids are struggling with the back and forth between households. My dad and Rachel are now living together in some apartment across town. They keep trying to act like this is some romantic love story instead of acknowledging the pain they caused. My dad has been calling me constantly asking to talk things through and wanting me to understand his side. He keeps saying he never meant for anyone to get hurt, but that he couldn't deny his feelings for Rachel anymore. The divorce has been messy as hell. My mom found out that my dad had been hiding money in a separate account and had even bought Rachel jewelry with money from their joint savings. She's had to get a really aggressive lawyer because my dad was trying to lowball her on the settlement. It's been 8 months of pure chaos with court dates, depositions, and constant fighting over assets. Here's where the wedding comes in. My fiancé Tyler and I got engaged 10 months ago, before any of this happened. We've been planning this wedding for almost a year, and my dad was supposed to walk me down the aisle. It was something I'd been looking forward to since I was little. He used to joke when I was a kid that he was going to cry like a baby when he walked me down the aisle someday. But now I can't stomach the thought of having him there in that role. Every time I picture my wedding day, all I can think about is how he destroyed our family and broke my mom's heart. I don't want him representing the male figure giving me away when he couldn't even stay faithful to his own marriage vows. 2 weeks ago, I called my dad and told him I didn't want him to walk me down the aisle. I said he was still invited to the wedding as a guest, but I couldn't have him in that special role after what he did to our family. He was devastated. He started crying on the phone and begging me to reconsider. He said he made mistakes, but he's still my father and he loves me. He said his relationship with Rachel doesn't change how he feels about me and that he's been dreaming of walking me down the aisle since I was born. The conversation got heated when I told him that his actions have consequences, and this was one of them. He accused me of punishing him and taking my mom's side instead of staying neutral. He said I was being unfair because his marriage problems with my mom don't involve me. I lost it at that point and told him that destroying our family absolutely involves me. I said I watched my mom nearly have a nervous breakdown because of his selfishness, and that I couldn't pretend everything was fine just so he could feel good about himself on my wedding day. Since then, my extended family has been divided. My dad's parents and siblings think I'm being cruel, and that I should separate his role as my father from his role as my mom's husband. They say he made mistakes in his marriage, but he's always been a good dad to me, which is honestly true. He coached my soccer team, helped me with homework, and was always supportive of my goals and dreams. My mom's family obviously supports my decision, but they're also encouraging me to cut my dad out of the wedding entirely, which I don't want to do. My aunt keeps saying that even inviting him is too generous after what he put my mom through. My brother Ryan thinks I should let dad walk me down the aisle to keep the peace, but he also understands why I don't want to. He says we shouldn't make our relationship with dad conditional on his marriage choices. But Ryan wasn't the one holding mom while she sobbed every night for 2 months straight. Some of my friends think I'm being too harsh and that affairs happen all the time. They say I should focus on my own happiness and not let my parents' drama ruin my wedding day. My college roommate literally said it's not like he killed someone, which made me want to scream. But my close friends completely support me and say they'd do the same thing in my situation. My best friend Hannah said she can't even imagine having to smile and act happy while the person who destroyed her mom got to play the proud father role. Tyler has been supportive of whatever I decide, but I can tell he's stressed about all the family drama surrounding our wedding. His family is very traditional, and they think the father walking the bride down the aisle is an important tradition that shouldn't be disrupted by personal issues. His mom keeps making comments about how sad it will be if my dad isn't involved in the ceremony. The thing is, I don't even know who would walk me down the aisle instead. My brother is Tyler's best man, so asking him would mess up the whole wedding party. My grandfather on my mom's side died 3 years ago, and my grandfather on my dad's side has dementia and can barely recognize us anymore. I've considered walking myself, but that feels depressing and like I'm making a statement instead of just having the wedding I want. Yesterday, my dad showed up at my apartment unannounced, begging me to change my mind. He brought a photo album of us together throughout my childhood and kept pointing to pictures saying, "Remember this day," and "Remember how happy we were." He had pictures of him teaching me to ride a bike, helping me with my science fair project, walking me to my first day of school. He said he's made mistakes as a husband, but never as a father, and that this decision will ruin our relationship forever. Seeing those pictures almost broke me because they reminded me of how close we used to be. My dad was honestly my hero growing up. When other kids' dads were too busy or uninterested, mine was always there cheering me on and making me feel special. I told him that he should have thought about consequences before he decided to have an affair with my mom's best friend for 2 years. He got angry and said I was being dramatic and vindictive. He said if I go through with this, he might not come to the wedding at all because it would be too humiliating to sit there like a stranger at his own daughter's wedding. That threat really bothered me because despite everything, I do want my dad there. I just don't want him in that honored position when he's caused so much pain to our family. The idea of him not coming at all made me panic because then the affair would be taking away even more from my special day. Now I'm second-guessing everything. Maybe my friends are right, and I should separate his role as my father from what happened in his marriage. Maybe I'm letting my anger at him overshadow what should be a happy day. But every time I think about compromising, I picture my mom's face when she found out about the affair, and I remember all the nights I've held her while she cried. How can I honor someone who destroyed the woman who raised me and sacrificed everything for our family? Am I in the wrong for not letting my dad walk me down the aisle? Should I be able to separate his role as my father from his actions as a husband? Or am I justified in having boundaries about who gets to play special roles in my wedding? I'm so confused, and the wedding is getting closer. I need to make a decision soon, but I don't want to regret it either way. Update, 4 days later. Holy crap, this blew up way more than I expected. Thank you to everyone who took the time to comment and share their own experiences. Some of the responses were really harsh, but I guess that's what I asked for when I posted here. A lot of you pointed out that I seem conflicted about my decision, and you're absolutely right. I've been going back and forth constantly, because part of me desperately wants my dad to walk me down the aisle like we always planned, but another part of me feels like doing so would be betraying my mom and my own values. The comments that hit me hardest were from people who said they regretted letting cheating parents have special roles in their weddings, and from others who said they regretted excluding parents and never got another chance to make it right. Basically, I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't. After reading through hundreds of comments, I decided to have an honest conversation with my mom about how she really felt about the whole situation. I've been making assumptions about what she wanted without actually asking her directly. The conversation was harder than I expected. My mom has been slowly getting better over the past few months. She's back to work full-time, she's seeing friends again, and she started dating someone new last month. But when I brought up the wedding situation, I could see how much pain she's still carrying underneath the progress. She told me that while she's still devastated by my dad's affair, she doesn't want her pain to impact my wedding day. She said she's been in therapy working on separating his role as my father from her feelings about him as her ex-husband, and she thinks I should try to do the same. But then she said something that really got to me. "Sweetie, your dad broke my heart and destroyed our marriage, but that doesn't erase 24 years of him being your father. Don't let my pain steal a moment you might regret losing forever." She also told me that she'd been worried I was making this decision to protect her feelings rather than because it's what I actually wanted. She said the most important thing to her was that I felt good about my wedding day and that she'd support whatever decision I made. That conversation made me realize I needed to have a real heart-to-heart with my dad instead of just arguing about the wedding logistics. I called him and asked if we could meet somewhere neutral to talk to. We met at a coffee shop yesterday, and it was intense. I told him I needed him to acknowledge the full impact of what he'd done, not just to my mom but to our whole family. I said I needed to understand how he could justify what he did before I could feel comfortable having him in such an important role. That conversation didn't go the way I hoped. My dad kept trying to justify his affair by saying he and my mom had grown apart over the years and that their marriage had become more like roommates than lovers. He said he'd found something special with Rachel that he'd never experienced before, even with my mom when they were young. He said he was sorry for hurting people, but he wasn't sorry for finding love. He kept talking about how Rachel understood him in ways my mom never did, and how they had this incredible connection that he couldn't ignore. When I asked him if he understood why I was struggling with having him walk me down the aisle, he said he thought I was being manipulated by my mom's bitterness. He said my mom had always been dramatic, and that she was probably enjoying playing the victim and turning the kids against him. That comment made me see red. I told him that my mom had literally just told me she thought I should let him walk me down the aisle, so he was completely wrong about her manipulating me. I said if anyone was being manipulative, it was him trying to rewrite history to make himself the victim. I realized that my dad still doesn't fully grasp how his actions affected anyone beyond himself. He keeps framing this as a romantic story, where he just happened to hurt some people along the way, rather than understanding that he made deliberate choices that destroyed trust and stability for everyone who loved him. The conversation ended with both of us frustrated and angry. He said I was being unreasonable and that I'd understand when I was older and had been married longer. I told him I hoped I'd never understand what it felt like to betray someone who trusted me completely. But here's where it gets complicated. Last night, I was looking through my wedding planning folder and found a card my dad gave me when Tyler and I got engaged. He wrote about how proud he was of the woman I'd become, how much he loved Tyler, and how excited he was to walk me down the aisle to start my new life. He said he'd been dreaming of that moment since the day I was born, and that it would be one of the proudest moments of his life. Reading it made me sob because it reminded me of the relationship we used to have before everything went to shit. Despite everything he's done, he's still the man who taught me to drive, who stayed up all night helping me with college applications, who cried when I graduated and told everyone who would listen how proud he was of me. Some of the commenters who said I might regret excluding him from this moment really got to me. Even though I'm angry and disappointed in him, he's still my dad. 24 years of being a good father don't get completely erased by his horrible choices as a husband. So, I've made a decision, but it comes with non-negotiable conditions. I called my dad this morning and told him I would consider letting him walk me down the aisle, but only if he agreed to 3 things. First, he has to write a genuine apology letter to my mom acknowledging the full impact of what he did, not just saying he's sorry she got hurt. Second, he cannot bring Rachel to the wedding under any circumstances. Third, he has to agree to individual therapy to work on understanding why he made the choices he did. He immediately agreed to not bringing Rachel, which honestly surprised me. I thought he'd fight me on that since they're living together now. But he pushed back hard on the apology letter, saying he'd already apologized multiple times and didn't want to rehash everything. He said making him write a letter was degrading and that I was treating him like a child. I told him those were my conditions, and if he couldn't meet them, then my original decision stood. I said I needed to see that he understood the gravity of what he'd done before I could feel comfortable having him in such an important role at my wedding. He got quiet for a long time, then said he'd think about it and get back to me. That was this morning, and I haven't heard from him yet. Tyler thinks I'm handling this well by setting boundaries instead of just making an emotional decision. He said it shows I'm not acting out of pure anger, but trying to hold my dad accountable while still leaving room for our relationship. My brother thinks my conditions are fair, especially the therapy requirement. He said maybe this will be the wake-up call dad needs to actually deal with his shit instead of just expecting everyone to get over it. I'm still not sure what my dad will decide, but I feel better about this approach. If he can't acknowledge the full impact of his actions and commit to working on himself, then maybe he's not ready to have the honor of walking me down the aisle. But if he can meet my conditions, then maybe we can start rebuilding our relationship from a place of honesty instead of me just pretending everything is fine. I'll update again once I hear back from him. Update, 10 days later. Well, my dad's response has been a complete shit show and has made this situation so much worse than I thought possible. He called me 5 days ago and said he'd written the apology letter to my mom. When I asked if I could read it first, he got defensive and said it was between him and my mom. He said he'd already humbled himself enough by agreeing to write it and that demanding to review it first was crossing a line. That response immediately set off alarm bells. I told him I wanted to see the letter before he gave it to my mom, because I needed to know he was taking this seriously and not just going through the motions to manipulate his way back into my good graces. He refused and said I was being controlling and unreasonable. We got into a screaming match over the phone where he accused me of trying to micromanage his relationship with my mom, and I accused him of trying to half-ass his way out of real accountability. Finally, he agreed to let me read the letter, but when he brought it over 2 days ago, I understood why he'd been so reluctant to show me. The letter was barely half a page, and it was the most pathetic non-apology I've ever seen. It said something like, "Linda, I'm sorry our marriage didn't work out and that you got hurt in the process. I never intended to cause you pain, but sometimes people grow apart and find connection elsewhere. What Rachel and I have is real love, and I hope someday you can understand that I couldn't fight those feelings. I hope you can find happiness and that we can all move forward as a family for the sake of the kids." I was absolutely furious. This wasn't an acknowledgement of what he'd done. It was him reframing a deliberate, 2-year affair as something that just happened naturally. He made it sound like their marriage just didn't work out, instead of admitting that he chose to betray my mom with her best friend while lying to her face every day. When I told him the letter was completely inadequate and insulting, he got angry and said he was tired of being expected to grovel. He said he'd apologized multiple times and didn't understand what more I wanted from him. I explained that I wanted him to take actual responsibility for his choices, instead of making it sound like the affair was something that happened to him rather than something he actively chose to do. I wanted him to acknowledge that he lied to my mom for 2 years, that he betrayed her trust with her best friend, that he stole money from their joint account to buy his mistress gifts, and that he prioritized his own desires over his family's well-being. He said I was being unrealistic and that he'd already compromised enough by agreeing to write anything at all. He said if this letter wasn't good enough, then nothing would be, and maybe I just wanted to punish him forever. I told him he was absolutely right. If this was his best effort at taking responsibility, then he wasn't ready to walk me down the aisle. That's when he completely lost his shit. He started screaming at me about how I was an ungrateful brat who didn't understand what real marriage was like. He said I was too young and naive to understand that marriages get stale, and that sometimes you need passion to feel alive again. Then, he said something that I'll never forgive him for. He said that maybe it was better that he wouldn't be walking me down the aisle because I was turning into a cold, judgmental bitch just like my mother, and he didn't want to be part of a wedding celebrating someone who couldn't understand love and forgiveness. I hung up on him and haven't spoken to him since, but it gets worse. Yesterday, my mom called me crying. Apparently my dad had given her the shitty letter anyway, along with a message that it was the best I would allow him to do, and that I was forcing him to humiliate himself. My mom was devastated all over again. She said reading the letter felt like being betrayed again because it was so dismissive of her pain. She said she couldn't believe he was still trying to justify the affair and make himself the victim. But then she told me something that made me realize how much worse this situation really is. She said my dad had also told her that I was being manipulated by my therapist and my friends into hating him, and that she needed to talk sense into me before I destroyed our family permanently. He's literally trying to triangulate me and my mom against each other instead of just taking responsibility for what he did. My brother is livid. He called my dad and told him he was being a manipulative asshole, and that if he didn't stop trying to pit me and mom against each other, Ryan would cut him off completely too. My dad's response was to send both me and Ryan a long text message about how we were breaking his heart and choosing our bitter mother over our father, who had always loved and supported us. He said he was done trying to maintain relationships with children who couldn't show him basic respect and love. So now my dad has basically cut us off instead of taking any responsibility for his actions. He's not coming to the wedding at all, which wasn't what I wanted but seems to be what's happening. The crazy part is that I actually feel relieved. I was so stressed about trying to find a way to include him while maintaining my boundaries, and now I don't have to worry about it anymore. He made the choice for me by showing his true colors. My mom has been incredibly supportive through all of this. She apologized for my dad putting me in this position and said she was proud of me for standing up for what I believed in. She said she'd rather have him miss the wedding than have him there pretending to be sorry while actively trying to manipulate us. Tyler's family has been surprisingly understanding about the whole situation. His mom said that her own father had caused drama around her wedding and that sometimes family members show you who they really are during important moments. She said the people who truly love you will find a way to show up and support you, and the people who don't will find excuses to make everything about themselves. I've decided that my brother will walk me down the aisle instead. He's stepping down as best man, and Tyler's asking his brother Connor to fill that role instead. Ryan said he'd be honored to do it and that he's proud to support me on my wedding day after watching me handle this whole situation with more maturity than our father showed. Part of me is heartbroken that my dad won't be there, but I also feel like I learned something important about who he really is. If he'd rather miss his daughter's wedding than write a genuine apology to the woman he betrayed, then that tells me everything I need to know about his priorities and his character. The wedding is in 3 months, and I'm trying to focus on celebrating with the people who actually want to be there for me without making it all about themselves. Update: 3 weeks later, some unexpected shit has gone down, and this situation has gotten even more complicated. 2 weeks ago, Rachel called me out of the blue. I almost didn't answer because I had no interest in talking to her, but something made me pick up. She was crying and said she needed to apologize to me and my family for everything that had happened. She said living with my dad for the past few months had opened her eyes to some things about him that she hadn't seen when they were sneaking around. Apparently, my dad has been treating her like shit. He's been angry and resentful that his affair cost him his relationship with me and Ryan, and he's been taking it out on her. She said he drinks too much now and gets mean when he's drunk, calling her names and blaming her for ruining his family. She said she realized that if he could betray my mom after 23 years of marriage, he could eventually do the same thing to her. She said the guilt of what she'd done to my mom and to her own family had been eating her alive, and that she couldn't live with herself anymore. Rachel told me she was planning to leave my dad and try to work things out with Mike for the sake of their kids. She said Mike had been willing to consider reconciliation if she could prove she was genuinely done with my dad and committed to rebuilding their marriage. She said she wanted to apologize to my mom and to me before she tried to fix her own family. I told her I appreciated the call, but that I wasn't ready to forgive her. She said she understood and just wanted me to know that she was genuinely sorry for destroying my family. What really surprised me was what she said about my dad. She said that during their affair, he'd always painted my mom as cold and unaffectionate and made it seem like their marriage had been dead for years. But after living with him, she realized he was probably lying about that too. She said he never took responsibility for anything and always found ways to blame other people for his problems. She also told me that my dad had been talking about trying to win back his children by showing up at my wedding uninvited. She said he'd been drinking and ranting about how he wasn't going to let me keep him away from the most important day of his daughter's life. That scared the shit out of me. I immediately talked to Tyler about beefing up security at the venue. We decided to hire a couple of off-duty police officers to be there discreetly, and I gave them my dad's name and photo. A week later, my dad's brother, my uncle, called me. He said he'd heard about everything that had happened and wanted to talk to me about my father. My uncle told me that my dad had always been selfish and self-centered, even as a kid. He said the family had been hoping that marriage and kids would help him grow up, but that he'd never really changed. He said he wasn't surprised about the affair, just disappointed that my dad had hurt so many people. He also told me that my dad had been calling family members trying to get them to boycott my wedding unless I let him walk me down the aisle. Apparently, he'd been telling people that I was being manipulated by my mom and that the family needed to show a united front to save me from making a terrible mistake. Most of the family told him he was being ridiculous, but a few of my dad's siblings were actually considering not coming to support him. My uncle said he'd been calling everyone to make sure they understood the real situation and that they knew my dad was the one creating the drama, not me. My uncle also warned me that my dad had been getting worse since Rachel left him. She'd apparently packed up and left 3 days after our phone call, and my dad had been spiraling ever since. My uncle said dad had shown up at his house drunk last week, ranting about how everyone had turned against him and how he was going to make sure I understood what I was throwing away. That conversation made me realize I needed to take Rachel's warning about him potentially crashing the wedding seriously. I talked to my wedding planner about the security situation, and she helped coordinate with the venue to make sure all the vendors knew that my father was not authorized to make any changes or access any areas of the venue. But the most shocking thing happened 3 days ago. My mom got a call from my dad's current boss saying that my dad had been fired for inappropriate behavior at work. Apparently, he'd been drinking during work hours and had gotten into a screaming match with a coworker who mentioned something about wedding planning. The boss said they'd been trying to work with him because they knew he was going through a divorce, but his behavior had become too disruptive. My mom told me about it because she was worried about how unhinged my dad seemed to be getting. She said she was concerned he might do something dangerous and that maybe I should consider getting a restraining order. I didn't think it would come to that, but then yesterday my dad showed up at my apartment again. He looked terrible, unshaven, bloodshot eyes, and he clearly hadn't been taking care of himself. He started pounding on my door at 9 p.m., yelling about how I needed to stop being stubborn and let him be part of my wedding. I didn't open the door, but I could hear him through it saying that he was my father and that nothing I did could change that. He said he'd made mistakes, but that every father deserves to walk his daughter down the aisle, and that I was being cruel and unforgiving. Then he started getting angrier, saying that my mom had poisoned me against him, and that I was too stupid to see how I was being manipulated. He said I would regret this for the rest of my life, and that someday I'd realize what I'd thrown away. I called the police, and by the time they arrived, my dad was sitting in his car in the parking lot crying. The officers talked to him and told him he needed to leave and not come back. They said if I wanted to file a restraining order, this incident would support it. My dad looked up at my apartment window before he drove away, and the look on his face was a mixture of sadness and anger that honestly scared me. Tyler was staying at his place that night, but he came over immediately when I called him. He said we should definitely get a restraining order, and that he was worried about what my dad might do as the wedding got closer. I filed for a temporary restraining order this morning. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but I realized that my dad's behavior was escalating and I couldn't risk him ruining my wedding day or potentially hurting someone. My brother has been incredible through all of this. He said he was proud of me for protecting myself and that dad's behavior proved I'd made the right decision about not letting him walk me down the aisle. Ryan also said he was going to make sure the wedding was everything I dreamed of, despite all the family drama. The wedding is in 2 months, and I'm trying to focus on the positive. Tyler and I are so happy together, and I'm excited to start our married life. I just wish it wasn't happening under such stressful circumstances. My mom has been seeing her therapist more frequently to deal with all the new stress my dad's behavior has caused. She said she never imagined he could become this unstable, and that she was grateful I was protecting myself. I keep thinking about how different things could have been if my dad had just taken responsibility for his actions and genuinely tried to make amends. Instead, he chose to double down on his selfishness and blame everyone else for the consequences of his choices. Part of me still loves the father he used to be, but I'm starting to accept that person might not have ever really existed. Maybe this is who he always was, and I just never saw it before. Update: 6 weeks later. My wedding was 3 weeks ago, and I need to tell you what happened because it was both the best and most stressful day of my life. First, the good stuff. The wedding itself was absolutely magical. My brother walking me down the aisle felt perfect and natural. He whispered to me right before we started walking that he was honored to be supporting me and that he'd always have my back, no matter what. There wasn't a dry eye in the house, including Tyler's tough guy construction worker, Dad. My mom looked absolutely stunning and happier than I'd seen her in over a year. She gave the most beautiful mother of the bride speech about love, resilience, and choosing the people who choose you back. When she talked about watching me grow into a strong woman who stands up for her values, even when it's difficult, I completely lost it. Tyler and I had written our own vows, and when he promised to always be honest with me and to never take my trust for granted, I knew everyone was thinking about my dad's absence and why those words mattered so much. But of course, my dad couldn't just let me have my day in peace. The morning of the wedding, I woke up to multiple missed calls from my uncle. When I called him back, he told me that my dad had shown up at his house at 6 a.m., drunk and rambling about how he was going to crash the wedding and make things right with me. My uncle had managed to get my dad's car keys away from him and was trying to sober him up, but he was worried my dad would call an Uber or find another way to get to the venue. I made the difficult decision to tell Tyler and my mom what was happening, but we agreed not to let it ruin the morning. The security team we'd hired was already aware of the situation, and Tyler's family quietly arranged for some additional people to keep an eye out without making it obvious to the other guests. About an hour before the ceremony was supposed to start, my dad actually showed up at the venue. The security officers stopped him at the entrance to the parking lot, but he started causing a scene, yelling about how it was his daughter's wedding and nobody could keep him away. Tyler's dad and my brother went out to deal with the situation while I was getting my final photos taken with my mom and bridesmaids. They told my dad he needed to leave immediately, or they would call the police to enforce the restraining order. According to my brother, my dad looked absolutely terrible. He'd clearly been drinking and probably hadn't slept in days. He started crying and begging to just see me for 5 minutes, saying he was sorry and that he just wanted to tell me he loved me. Tyler's dad, who's normally a pretty soft-spoken guy, apparently told my dad that if he really loved me, he would leave and let me have my wedding day without his drama. He said that a real father would want his daughter to be happy, even if it meant sacrificing his own wants. My dad finally left, but not before yelling that someday I'd realize what I'd lost and that I'd regret treating him this way for the rest of my life. My mom, Tyler, and my brother made the decision to handle all of this without telling me the full details until after the ceremony. They just said that Dad had tried to come, but that security had handled it, and everything was fine. Looking back, I'm so grateful they protected me from the drama, so I could focus on celebrating. The ceremony itself was perfect. When my brother and I reached the altar and he placed my hand in Tyler's, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Take care of my sister. She's the strongest woman I know." Tyler promised he would, and I felt so loved and supported in that moment. During the reception, so many people came up to me to say how beautiful the wedding was and how happy Tyler and I looked together. My dad's absence was noticeable to family members who knew the situation, but it didn't feel sad or empty like I'd worried it would. Instead, it felt like the people who were there were the ones who truly cared about my happiness. The most touching moment was when Tyler's dad asked me to dance during the father-daughter dance. He said he knew it wasn't the same as having my own father there, but that he was honored to stand in, and that he already considered me his daughter. I cried through the entire song, but they were happy tears. Mike, Rachel's ex-husband, actually came to the wedding with his kids. It turns out that Rachel had reached out to my mom a few weeks before the wedding to apologize properly, and she'd asked Mike to attend in their place since the kids had always considered me like a cousin. It was really touching to have them there, and it felt like we were reclaiming some of the family connections that my dad and Rachel had tried to destroy. 3 days after the wedding, I got a letter from my dad. It was 12 pages long, handwritten, and much more coherent than I expected. Parts of it were genuinely apologetic. He acknowledged that he'd made terrible choices and that he'd handled the wedding situation badly. He said he was getting help for his drinking and that he was in therapy trying to understand why he destroyed his family. But other parts of the letter were still trying to justify his affair and make me understand why he'd felt so disconnected from my mom. He wrote about how lonely he'd been in his marriage and how Rachel had made him feel alive again. Even in his apology, he couldn't completely let go of his narrative about finding true love. The letter made me sad because it showed that he was trying to change, but it also confirmed that he still didn't fully understand the impact of his choices. He was sorry for hurting people, but he still seemed to think the affair itself was justified. Tyler and I are back from our honeymoon now, and settling into married life. I feel like going through all this drama before the wedding actually made us stronger as a couple. Tyler saw me at my most stressed and conflicted, and he never wavered in his support. He helped me make decisions based on my values rather than fear or guilt. My mom is doing really well. The divorce was finalized 2 weeks before my wedding, and she's been getting more serious with the guy she's been dating. He's a really good man who treats her with the respect and kindness she deserves. Seeing her happy and confident again has been incredible. My relationship with my brother has gotten so much closer through all of this. He stepped up in ways I never expected and showed me what it looks like when someone truly has your back unconditionally. I still think about my dad sometimes and feel sad about how things turned out. I miss the father I thought he was, but I've accepted that person might not have ever really existed. The man who showed up drunk to try to crash my wedding isn't someone I recognize as the dad who used to read me bedtime stories. Some people have asked if I regret not letting him walk me down the aisle, especially after seeing how his life has fallen apart. But honestly, I don't. His behavior at the wedding proved that he still wasn't capable of putting my needs before his own drama. If I'd given in to his demands, it would have taught him that throwing tantrums and refusing to take responsibility was an effective way to get what he wanted. I'm cautiously hopeful that someday my dad will get the help he needs, and we can rebuild some kind of relationship. The fact that he's in therapy and acknowledging some of his mistakes in the letter gives me a tiny bit of hope. But it will have to be on completely different terms, with him taking full responsibility for his choices and their impact on everyone around him. For now, I'm focusing on my marriage and my future with Tyler. We're looking at houses and talking about starting a family in a few years. I feel like I learned so much about what I want in a relationship by watching what I didn't want through my parents' situation.